Welcome, dear listeners, to a whispered journey, into the heart of ancient Rome. Tonight, we will traverse the hallowed halls of history, not with booming pronouncements, but with the softest of whispers, a documentary, a soothing narrative of a man whose name echoes through millennia. Julius Caesar, a name synonymous with power, ambition, and ultimately tragedy. Imagine, if you will, the bustling streets of Rome, the scent of spices and sweat, the murmur of 1,000 voices, the grandeur of temples, the squalor of tenements. It is against this vibrant, tumultuous backdrop that our story begins. The Roman Republic, a grand experiment in self-governance, was teetering, a colossus struggling with its own weight. Factionalism, corruption, the ever-present threat of civil strife. These were the currents that shaped the early life of Gaius Julius Caesar. He was born sometime in the summer of 100 BC. Though the precise day is lost to the whispers of time, into a patrician family, the Julii. An ancient lineage, they claim descent from Aeneas himself, the legendary founder of Rome, and through him, from the goddess Venus. A divine heritage, whispered among the elite. Yet, despite their noble roots, the Julii were not among the wealthiest or most powerful of Rome's senatorial families. Their fortunes had waned. His childhood would have been spent in the Suburra, a vibrant, bustling, sometimes notorious district of Rome. Not the grandest of neighborhoods for a patrician, but one that exposed him to the raw pulse of Roman life. He would have heard the clamor of the Forum, the debates of the Senate, even as a boy. He would have seen the stark contrasts of Roman society, the opulent villas of the rich, alongside the cramped insulae, the apartment blocks of the common people. This early exposure to the lives of ordinary Romans would profoundly shape his understanding of the populace and their desires. His education would have been typical for a young Roman of his standing. Tutors teaching him Greek and Latin rhetoric, philosophy, history. He was a bright student with a keen intellect and a formidable memory. He excelled in rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking, a skill that would become a cornerstone of his political success. Imagine him, a young boy, practicing his speeches, the cadences of his voice already hinting at the power it would one day command. But beyond the formal lessons, there were more profound influences shaping young Caesar. His aunt, Julia, was married to Gaius Marius, a towering figure in Roman politics, a military genius, and a champion of the populares, the political faction that advocated for the rights and interests of the common people, as opposed to the optimates, who represented the interests of the conservative aristocracy, the established elite of the Senate. Marius was a self-made man, a novus homo, a new man, who had risen through military prowess to hold the consulship, an unprecedented 7 times. He challenged the traditional power structures, and his influence on the young Caesar was immense. Through Marius, Caesar would have absorbed the ideals of popular leadership, the necessity of appealing directly to the people for political power. He would have witnessed firsthand the fierce political rivalries and the violent struggles that characterized the late Republic. The political climate was brutal. In 82 BC, when Caesar was just 18, Rome was consumed by civil war. Sulla, a ruthless optimate general, Marius's great rival, emerged victorious. He initiated a reign of terror, known as the proscriptions. Lists of his enemies, often wealthy citizens, were posted publicly, their property confiscated, their lives forfeit. It was a time of fear and brutal reprisal. Caesar, as Marius's nephew, found himself in grave danger. Sulla ordered him to divorce his young wife. Cornelia, the daughter of Lucius Cornelius Cinna, another prominent populist leader and an enemy of Sulla. Caesar defiantly refused. A bold act for such a young man, a sign of the unwavering conviction that would define his life. Sulla, seeing the defiance in Caesar's eyes, is said to have declared that in Caesar he saw many Mariuses. A chilling prophecy from a man who had sought to eradicate all traces of his rival. Caesar's life hung by a thread. Only through the intervention of powerful friends and family members, the Vestal Virgins, even was his name, eventually removed from the proscription lists. He was spared, but the experience, the close brush with death, and the stark reality of political violence undoubtedly left an indelible mark. It taught him perhaps the fragility of life and the ruthless nature of power. To escape the lingering threat and to gain military experience, Caesar left Rome. He served in Asia, under Marcus Minucius Thermus, and later in Cilicia, under Publius Servilius Isoricus. These were formative years where he honed his military skills, learning the discipline of the Roman legion, the strategies of command. He distinguished himself, earning the civic crown, for saving a fellow soldier's life during the siege of Mytilene. These were not the grand campaigns that would later define him, but the essential proving grounds for a future general. It was during this period, on a journey to Rhodes to study rhetoric under the famous Apollonius Molon, that an extraordinary event occurred. Caesar was captured by pirates. This was not uncommon in the Mediterranean, but Caesar's response was anything but ordinary. Instead of showing fear, he treated his captors with disdain. He joked with them, read them his poetry, and even demanded that they raise his ransom to a higher sum befitting his true importance. He promised them, with a chilling calm, that once freed, he would return and crucify every single one of them. And he did. After his ransom was paid, he swiftly raised a fleet, pursued the pirates, captured them, and fulfilled his promise. This audacious act demonstrated his unflinching courage, his determination, and a ruthless streak that would become increasingly apparent throughout his career. It was a glimpse of the man he would become, a man who spoke his mind and backed it with action. Upon his return to Rome, Caesar began his ascent through the traditional, but often brutal ladder of Roman politics, the cursus honorum. His early career was marked by a relentless ambition and a strategic understanding of how to win popular favor. He began as an orator, a lawyer, defending clients in court, and using these opportunities to showcase his rhetorical prowess and to build a public profile. His speeches were known for their clarity, their power, and their emotional appeal. His first significant political office was that of quaestor in 69 BC. This role involved financial administration, and it took him to Hispania, modern-day Spain. Here a poignant moment is said to have occurred. While visiting a statue of Alexander the Great, Caesar reportedly wept. When asked why, he responded that Alexander, at his age, had already conquered a vast empire, while he, Caesar, had achieved nothing truly great. This anecdote, whether entirely factual or not, reveals the immense ambition that gnawed at his soul, the restless drive for glory and for historical significance. He returned to Rome and continued his political climb. He served as aedile in 65 BC. This was a crucial office for a rising politician. Aediles were responsible for public works, for the maintenance of temples and streets, and crucially, for organizing public games and festivals, the Ludi Romani. These were immensely popular events, a chance for politicians to display their generosity, their wealth, and their commitment to the people. Caesar, with his characteristic flair, spared no expense. He borrowed heavily, accumulating vast debts to put on the most lavish and spectacular games Rome had ever seen. Gladiatorial contests, theatrical performances, exotic beasts, the people adored him. He knew instinctively that public opinion was a powerful currency. He also restored the trophies of Marius, a bold and politically charged act that further endeared him to the populace and subtly challenged the Optimate establishment. His debts grew, but so did his popularity. In 63 BC, a year of great political turmoil, marked by the Catilinarian conspiracy, Caesar aimed for the highest religious office in Rome, Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest. This was a lifetime appointment, granting immense prestige and political influence. Despite being younger and less established than his rivals, two respected former consuls, Caesar, against all expectations, won the election. His victory was a testament to his growing popularity and his shrewd understanding of popular politics. It also solidified his image as a man favored by the gods. A soft, crisp rustle of gold coins, then a slight clink. By this point, Caesar's debts were astronomical. He was deeply beholden to Marcus Licinius Crassus, arguably the wealthiest man in Rome, a shrewd businessman, and a powerful senator. Crassus, a man of immense ambition himself, saw in Caesar a valuable asset, a charismatic leader, who could be used to further his own political and financial interests. Their relationship was one of mutual benefit and carefully calculated risk. The political landscape was increasingly fractured. The Senate, dominated by the Optimates, was resistant to reform and viewed charismatic popular figures with deep suspicion. the Republic a system designed for a city-state. And so, our whispered journey continues. As Julius Caesar, now consul of Rome, with the power of the Triumvirate silently guiding his ascent, turned his gaze towards the wild, untamed lands of Gaul. His appointment as proconsul of Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum was not just a political plum. It was a strategic masterpiece, an opportunity he had meticulously crafted. Gaul, a vast territory encompassing much of modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands, was a land of diverse Celtic tribes, fiercely independent, often warring amongst themselves, but largely untouched by direct Roman control. For Rome, it represented both a buffer against Germanic incursions and a rich source of resources, wealth, and most importantly for Caesar, military glory. The year was 58 BC. Caesar was not merely appointed to govern these provinces. He was granted an extraordinary command, 5 legions initially, later expanded, for a remarkable 5-year term, later extended to 10. This provided him with the necessary legal framework and military force to embark on what would become one of history's most ambitious and successful military campaigns. His departure from Rome was not merely a journey to a distant province. It was the beginning of a relentless march towards unparalleled power. He understood deeply that true political influence in Rome, in that volatile era, was forged not in the Senate, but on the battlefield. His initial pretext for intervention in Gaul arrived swiftly. The Helvetii, a large Celtic tribe from what is now Switzerland, decided to migrate en masse across Gaul, threatening Roman territory and allies. This provided Caesar with the perfect justification to intervene. He acted with characteristic speed and decisiveness. His legions, disciplined and well-trained, met the Helvetii near Bibracte. It was a brutal, hard-fought battle, but Caesar's tactical genius and the superior organization of his Roman forces prevailed. The Helvetii were decisively defeated, forced to return to their lands, their migration halted. This victory immediately established Caesar's authority and sent a clear message to the other Gallic tribes. Rome, under Caesar, was a force to be reckoned with. This initial success was followed by a series of campaigns against other prominent Gallic tribes. He confronted the Suebi, a powerful Germanic tribe led by Ariovistus, who had crossed the Rhine and established a threatening presence in Gaul. Caesar, through a combination of diplomacy and military pressure, forced Ariovistus back across the Rhine. This not only secured Roman Gaul, but also enhanced Caesar's reputation as a protector against external threats. He was already beginning to shape the narrative of his campaigns, portraying himself as the savior of Gaul from barbarian incursions, a master of both war and diplomacy. The conquest continued, relentless and methodical. He moved north, confronting the formidable Belgae, a confederation of fierce tribes known for their martial prowess. The Nervii, a particularly brave and skilled tribe within the Belgic Confederation, launched a surprise attack against Caesar's legions, almost catching them off guard. It was a moment of extreme peril, but Caesar, displaying remarkable personal bravery and leadership, rallied his troops, fighting alongside them in the thick of the battle. The Romans ultimately triumphed, but the battle underscored the ferocity of their Gallic opponents and Caesar's own unflinching resolve. His campaigns in Gaul were not without their desperate moments, but his ability to adapt, innovate, and inspire his soldiers invariably led to victory. Caesar's military genius truly shone in Gaul. He was not just a general, he was an innovator. His legions moved with incredible speed, covering vast distances in record time, often surprising their enemies. He mastered siege warfare, employing ingenious techniques and engineering feats. His construction of bridges across the Rhine twice, simply to make a point and demonstrate Roman power to the Germanic tribes, were engineering marvels in themselves, built in mere days. These feats were not just military necessities. They were acts of propaganda, showcasing Roman might and technological superiority. His commentaries, Commentarii de Bello Gallico, or Commentaries on the Gallic War, written by Caesar himself, became a powerful tool of self-promotion. He narrated his campaigns in the third person, meticulously detailing his strategies, his victories, and the bravery of his legions. These commentaries, ostensibly historical accounts, were also brilliant pieces of propaganda, carefully crafted to inform, impress, and sway public opinion back in Rome. They presented him as a benevolent conqueror, bringing civilization to barbarians and protecting Roman interests, while subtly highlighting his own indispensable role. He was not just fighting a war, he was shaping his own legend. The vastness of Gaul and the complexity of its tribal societies presented continuous challenges. Yet, Caesar pressed on, driven by ambition and an insatiable desire for glory. His relentless pace, however, was not limited to continental Gaul. In 55 and 54 BC, Caesar undertook 2 expeditions across the English Channel, invading Britain. These invasions, while not leading to permanent conquest, were audacious feats for their time. They demonstrated Roman naval power and extended the reach of Rome's influence to the very edge of the known world. For the Roman public, these were thrilling achievements, adding to Caesar's already burgeoning reputation as an unparalleled conqueror. His forays across the Rhine into Germania, though brief, further cemented his image as a protector of Roman territory and a deterrent against Germanic incursions. These expeditions, more punitive than conquering in nature, showcased Rome's willingness to project power beyond its traditional frontiers. Each successful campaign, each new conquest, each report sent back to Rome, amplified the whispers of his greatness. His name was on every tongue, his victories celebrated in the streets, and his growing legions were fiercely loyal to him, not just to the Republic. But the complete subjugation of Gaul was far from simple. In 52 BC, a massive, unified uprising erupted, led by one of the most charismatic and formidable Gallic leaders, Vercingetorix of the Arverni tribe. Vercingetorix, recognizing the fragmented nature of the Gallic resistance, managed to unite many of the disparate tribes under his command, presenting Caesar with his greatest challenge yet. This was not just a battle against individual tribes. It was a war against a unified Gallic nation, fighting for its freedom. The culmination of this great uprising was the epic siege of Alesia. Vercingetorix, with a massive Gallic army, fortified himself on a hilltop stronghold. Caesar, with characteristic audacity, decided not to assault the fortress directly but to besiege it. What followed was a masterpiece of military engineering and strategy. Caesar's legions constructed an elaborate system of circumvallation, a 20-kilometer-long ring of fortifications complete with ditches, ramparts, watchtowers, and traps, encircling Alesia, designed to prevent Vercingetorix's forces from escaping or receiving supplies. But the challenge did not end there. A vast Gallic relief army, estimated to be over 250,000 strong, arrived to relieve Vercingetorix. Caesar, facing an enemy from within the fortress and a massive army from without, ordered the construction of a second ring of fortifications, an outer wall known as contravallation, facing outwards. His legions were now trapped between 2 immense Gallic armies, a precarious and dangerous position. The ensuing battle was one of history's most dramatic. Caesar's legions, outnumbered perhaps 5-1, fought with incredible discipline and courage, holding both lines against overwhelming odds. Caesar himself rode among his troops, inspiring them, leading from the front, a beacon of courage in the chaos. The fighting was desperate, but ultimately, the Roman discipline and Caesar's strategic brilliance prevailed. The relief army was routed, and Vercingetorix, seeing no hope, surrendered. The defeat of Vercingetorix at Alesia marked the effective end of Gallic independence. It was a decisive, crushing victory that cemented Rome's control over a vast and rich new territory. The Gallic Wars, spanning nearly 8 years, were over. Caesar had conquered Gaul, extending the Roman Republic's dominion to the Atlantic Ocean. The spoils of this conquest were immense: vast territories, immense wealth in gold and slaves, and most importantly, a battle-hardened, fiercely loyal army of 10 legions, deeply devoted to their general. Back in Rome, the news of Caesar's victories, especially Alesia, spread like wildfire. He was hailed as an unparalleled hero, a conqueror of epic proportions. The wealth flowing from Gaul into Rome fueled his political influence and allowed him to continue his lavish public works and games, further solidifying his popularity with the Roman populace. He had not only repaid his enormous debts, but had amassed a fortune of his own, making him one of the wealthiest men in Rome. But his extraordinary success, his immense popularity, and the unwavering loyalty of his legions were not without consequence. While celebrated by the people, they caused deep unease and fear among the conservative optimates in the Senate. They saw in Caesar not just a successful general, but a man of dangerous ambition, a potential threat to the very foundations of the Republic. The whispers of admiration began to mingle with the murmurs of fear. The balance of power in Rome was shifting inexorably towards one man. The stage was now set for the next, most perilous act in Caesar's extraordinary life: And so we turn the page in our whispered chronicle of Julius Caesar. His triumphant campaigns in Gaul had brought him unprecedented glory, immense wealth, and the unwavering loyalty of a formidable army. But back in Rome, his extraordinary success had sown seeds of deep apprehension and fear. The conservative faction in the Senate, the Optimates, saw Caesar's rising star not as a testament to Roman might, but as a dangerous threat to the very fabric of the Republic. They feared his ambition, his popularity with the common people, and above all, the devotion of his legions. The Republic, designed for a system of checks and balances, was now faced with a figure of overwhelming individual power. The whispers in the forum grew colder, laced with suspicion and jealousy. The delicate balance of the First Triumvirate, the secret alliance that had propelled Caesar to power, was beginning to unravel. In 53 BC, a pivotal event occurred. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthy financier and political heavyweight, met a disastrous end in Parthia at the Battle of Carrhae. His death removed a crucial pillar of support, a bridge between Caesar and Pompey. Then, even more tragically for the alliance, in 54 BC, Julia, Caesar's beloved daughter and Pompey's wife, died in childbirth. She had been the living bond between the two most powerful men in Rome. With her passing, the personal connection that had softened the edges of their political ambitions was severed. The path was now clear for their burgeoning rivalry to escalate into open conflict. Pompey, once Caesar's ally and son-in-law, had by now grown increasingly aligned with the Optimates. He had been granted extraordinary powers by the Senate, appointed sole consul, tasked with restoring order in Rome. The Senate, desperate to curb Caesar's power, began to view Pompey as their champion, the only man strong enough to stand against the conquering hero of Gaul. They saw in him a bulwark against Caesar's perceived tyranny. The political maneuvering became increasingly desperate. The Senate passed a decree demanding that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen to stand for election as consul. This was a trap. Without his legions, Caesar would be vulnerable to prosecution by his political enemies, who would undoubtedly seek to strip him of his wealth, his reputation, and perhaps even his life. Caesar knew the stakes. He had two options: obey the Senate and face almost certain political ruin, or defy them and plunge Rome into civil war. For months, negotiations were tense, fraught with mistrust and thinly veiled threats. Caesar sought a compromise, offering to lay down his command if Pompey did the same. But the Optimates, driven by fear and a desire to dismantle Caesar's power once and for all, refused. Their demands became absolute. He must disband his legions and return to Rome unprotected. On the 10th of January, 49 BC, standing on the banks of the tiny Rubicon River, the northern boundary of Italy, Caesar made his fateful decision. The river marked the sacred boundary of the Roman homeland. No general was permitted to cross it with an army. To do so was an act of treason, a declaration of war against the Republic itself. Legend has it that he paused, considering the monumental consequences of his actions, before uttering the immortal words, "Alia iacta est." The die is cast. With that declaration, he led his 13th legion across the shallow river. It was an irreversible step, a point of no return. He had chosen war. His advance on Rome was swift, a lightning campaign that stunned his opponents. Pompey and the Optimates, caught completely off guard by Caesar's audacious move and the speed of his legions, had no time to gather sufficient forces. They chose not to defend Rome, instead fleeing south, eventually crossing the Adriatic Sea to Greece, where they intended to raise a massive army from the eastern provinces and their vast network of allies. Rome, the eternal city, lay open to Caesar. He entered the capital unopposed, a conqueror, but one who was now branded a rebel by the very institutions he sought to command. Caesar did not immediately pursue Pompey. His priority was to secure Italy and eliminate any immediate threats within Roman territory. He turned his attention to Hispania, modern-day Spain, where several of Pompey's veteran legions were stationed. In a brilliant and rapid campaign, he defeated these forces, securing the western provinces and ensuring that no hostile army remained to threaten his rear while he confronted Pompey. His strategy was methodical: isolate and eliminate threats one by one. With the west secured, Caesar finally turned his gaze east towards Greece, where Pompey was amassing a formidable force. The confrontation was inevitable. The two greatest generals of their age, once allies, now bitter rivals, were destined to meet on the battlefield. The decisive clash came at Pharsalus in 48 BC. Pompey commanded a much larger army, superior in cavalry, with vast numbers of auxiliaries from across the eastern Mediterranean. Caesar, though outnumbered, had his veteran Gallic legions, fiercely loyal and hardened by years of relentless campaigning. The battle was a testament to Caesar's military genius. Pompey planned to use his superior cavalry to outflank Caesar's lines. But Caesar, anticipating this move, held back a hidden reserve of infantry, a fourth line, instructing them to use their javelins not to throw, but to thrust directly at the faces of Pompey's cavalrymen, aiming to disfigure them. The elite cavalry, unaccustomed to such a brutal and surprising tactic, broke and fled. This decisive blow exposed Pompey's left flank, and Caesar's disciplined legions pressed their advantage. The battle became a rout. Pompey's massive army disintegrated. Pompey himself fled, seeking refuge in Egypt. But fate, and the treacherous politics of the Ptolemaic court, had a cruel end in store for him. The young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, hoping to curry favor with the victorious Caesar, ordered Pompey's assassination. His head was presented to Caesar upon his arrival in Egypt, a macabre gift. Caesar, far from being pleased, was reportedly horrified and disgusted by the betrayal of his former friend and rival. He wept, not for the political opponent, but for the Roman general, the man he had once allied with, whose life had ended so ignominiously. Caesar found himself embroiled in the complex dynastic struggles of Egypt. He famously became entangled with Cleopatra VII, the charismatic and ambitious queen, supporting her claim to the throne against her brother Ptolemy XIII. The Alexandrian War was a naval and land struggle, proving Caesar's versatility beyond large-scale field battles. Cleopatra, with Caesar's backing, ultimately secured her throne, a testament to Caesar's influence even in the far reaches of the Mediterranean. His civil wars were far from over. Remaining pockets of optimates, fiercely clinging to the ideals of the Republic, continued to resist. Caesar relentlessly pursued them across the empire. In 47 BC, he crushed Pharnaces II of Pontus at the Battle of Zela, a victory so swift and complete that he famously sent the terse dispatch to Rome. Veni vidi vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. A testament to his unparalleled speed and efficiency in warfare. He then campaigned in Africa, at the Battle of Thapsus in 46 BC, against the forces of Cato the Younger, a staunch optimate and philosophical opponent of Caesar's autocratic tendencies and other Pompeian loyalists. After their defeat, Cato famously committed suicide rather than live under Caesar's rule. Finally, in 45 BC, Caesar fought the last major battle of the civil war at Munda, in Hispania, against the sons of Pompey. It was a brutal and desperate struggle, reportedly the hardest-fought battle of Caesar's career, but once again, his legions emerged victorious. The last vestiges of organized Republican resistance were crushed. With all his enemies vanquished, Caesar returned to Rome not just as a triumphant general, but as the undisputed master of the Roman world. The civil war had lasted for nearly 5 years, a period of immense turmoil and bloodshed that had shattered the old Republican order beyond repair. Caesar celebrated 4 magnificent triumphs: one for Gaul, one for Egypt, one for Pontus, and one for Africa. Each a lavish display of wealth, power, and glory, parading captives, treasures, and exotic animals through the streets of Rome. He was now at the zenith of his power, a living legend. But the very scale of his victory, the elimination of his rivals, and the overwhelming nature of his authority would lead directly to the final, tragic act of his life. The Republic, accustomed to the balance of power, was ill-equipped to handle a figure of such singular dominance. The whispers would begin again, but this time they would speak of kingship, of tyranny, and ultimately of desperate measures. The storm had passed, but a new, more dangerous one was already brewing in the shadows of the Senate House. And so we arrive at the final, poignant chapter in our whispered journey through the life of Julius Caesar. After years of relentless campaigning and brutal civil war, Caesar returned to Rome not merely as a victor, but as the undisputed master of the Roman world. The Republic, so long a system of shared power, was now effectively under the control of one man. He accumulated titles with astonishing speed: Dictator Perpetuo, or Dictator for Life, Pontifex Maximus, Consul, and numerous others. Each title was a thread in the tapestry of his absolute power, woven tighter and tighter around the ancient institutions of Rome. He was revered, feared, and for many, seen as a necessary strongman to bring order to a chaotic world. Caesar, however, was not content simply to rule. He embarked on a sweeping and ambitious program of reforms, aiming to rebuild Rome after decades of civil strife and neglect. His vision was grand, encompassing every aspect of Roman life. Perhaps his most enduring legacy was the calendar reform. The old Roman calendar was a mess, often out of sync with the seasons, manipulated by politicians for their own ends. Caesar, with the help of the astronomer Sosigenes, introduced the Julian calendar, a solar calendar that, with minor adjustments, remains the basis of our modern calendar today. Imagine, if you will, the satisfaction of bringing order to the very passage of time itself. He addressed the pressing social and economic issues of the day. He implemented land redistribution programs, settling his loyal veterans on plots of land throughout Italy and the provinces, often relieving the plight of the urban poor. He initiated ambitious public works projects, a grand new forum of Caesar, temples, basilicas, roads. These projects not only beautified Rome, but also provided much-needed employment for thousands, stimulating the economy. He reformed the grain dole, a system of public handouts that had become riddled with corruption, making it more efficient and reducing the number of recipients. These were practical, impactful changes that benefited the common people, further cementing his popularity. Caesar also expanded Roman citizenship, granting it to many communities in Gaul and Hispania, integrating them more fully into the Roman state. He even increased the size of the Senate, appointing many of his loyal supporters and prominent individuals from the provinces. While this diversified the Senate, it also served to dilute the power of the old Optimate families, further concentrating authority in his own hands. He sought to regulate debt, providing relief to debtors, a measure that further endeared him to the lower classes, but alienated many wealthy creditors. He envisioned a vast, unified Roman world, governed efficiently and justly, under his benevolent guidance. Yet, this relentless drive for reform, this centralization of power, came at a cost. Caesar, accustomed to the absolute command of a general on campaign, began to treat the Senate and the traditional republican institutions with increasing disdain. He often made decisions unilaterally, bypassing the Senate entirely, or presenting them with fait accompli. He accepted honors that bordered on the divine, having statues erected of himself alongside gods, and even wearing a laurel wreath, perhaps to hide his receding hairline, but also a symbol of permanent victory and distinction. The old guard, those who cherished the ideals of the Republic, watched with growing alarm. They saw not a benevolent dictator, but a potential king, a tyrant who threatened to extinguish the very essence of Roman liberty. The fear of kingship was profound in Rome. The memory of the tyrannical Etruscan kings, overthrown centuries ago to establish the Republic, was deeply ingrained in the Roman psyche. Any hint of a return to monarchy was anathema. Caesar's accumulation of titles, his public persona, his disregard for senatorial tradition, all fed into this growing anxiety. Whispers turned to murmurs of conspiracy. Among the very men he had pardoned, even promoted, after the Civil War, a plot began to form. The leaders of this conspiracy were men who believed they were acting to save the Republic. Marcus Junius Brutus, a man Caesar admired and had treated with great favor, and Gaius Cassius Longinus, a seasoned politician and military commander, were at its heart. They were joined by dozens of other senators, men from both the Optimate and even some from Caesar's own populars faction, who shared the conviction that Caesar's unchecked power was an existential threat to Rome. They believed that by eliminating Caesar, they would restore the Republic, sacrificing one man to save liberty. Omens, real or imagined, abound in the historical accounts leading up to Caesar's assassination. His wife, Calpurnia, reportedly had a terrifying dream of his death and begged him not to go to the Senate on the Ides of March. A soothsayer, Spurina, had warned him to beware the Ides of March. These warnings, perhaps dismissed by Caesar as superstition, contributed to the dramatic tension of the unfolding tragedy. The fateful day arrived, March 15th, 44 BC. The Ides of March. Despite the warnings, despite his wife's pleas, Caesar decided to attend the Senate meeting. It was held, not in the traditional Curia Julia, but in the theater of Pompey, ironically, a monument to his former ally and rival. He walked into the chamber, seemingly oblivious to the immediate danger, confident in his power, and surrounded by men he believed were his friends and colleagues. As he entered, the conspirators surrounded him, feigning a request. One of them, Tullius Cimber, pulled at his toga, a prearranged signal. Suddenly, the daggers appeared. The The first blow from Publius Servilius Casca struck his neck. Caesar tried to resist, to fight back, but more conspirators swarmed him. He was overwhelmed, stabbed repeatedly, a flurry of blades. The great general, the conqueror of Gaul, the master of Rome, fell. The most famous, though likely apocryphal, last words attributed to him are "Et tu, Brute?" "You too, Brutus?" Or perhaps, more accurately, "Kai su teknon?" "You too, my child," in Greek. Whatever his exact words, the shock of seeing Brutus, the man he had shown such clemency and favor, among his assassins, must have been a crushing blow. He reportedly pulled his toga over his head, accepting his fate as he received 23 stab wounds. He collapsed at the base of a statue of Pompey the Great, his old rival, a final, grim irony. The immediate aftermath was chaos. The senators, even many of those not involved in the conspiracy, fled in terror. The conspirators, believing they had liberated Rome, marched through the streets, proclaiming liberty, but found a population confused, fearful, and soon enraged. The people of Rome loved Caesar. He had championed their cause, provided them with jobs and bread, and brought them glory. His assassination, intended to restore the Republic, instead plunged Rome into even greater turmoil. The power vacuum left by Caesar's death quickly became apparent. Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal second-in-command, delivered a powerful and emotional funeral oration, famously displaying Caesar's blood-stained toga and pointing out the stab wounds. This act inflamed the Roman populace against the assassins, turning public opinion decisively against them. The conspirators, including Brutus and Cassius, were forced to flee Rome. The final act of the Roman Republic would be played out in the subsequent civil wars. Caesar's adopted son and heir, Gaius Octavius, later known as Octavian, emerged as a shrewd and formidable politician. He allied with Mark Antony and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, forming the Second Triumvirate, to avenge Caesar's death and consolidate power. They hunted down and defeated the conspirators at the Battle of Philippi. Another series of bloody conflicts followed, culminating in the final confrontation between Octavian and Antony at the Battle of Actium. Octavian emerged victorious, ushering in a new era. The death of Julius Caesar, though intended to save the Republic, ultimately sealed its fate. His assassination proved that a return to the old order was impossible. The Roman world had become too vast, too complex, and the power of individual generals too great for the old republican system to endure. Caesar's reforms, his military innovations, his absolute power, and the profound loyalty of his legions had irrevocably altered Rome. Octavian, learning from his adoptive father's fate, would eventually transform the Republic into the Roman Empire, becoming its first emperor, Augustus. Caesar's legacy is immense and multifaceted. He was a military genius, a brilliant politician, a gifted orator, and a visionary reformer. His conquests expanded the Roman world, his reforms shaped its future, and his very name became synonymous with imperial power, Kaiser Czar. He died a king in all but name, and his death paved the way for the very institution he seemingly fought to avoid. His story is a timeless testament to ambition, power, betrayal, and the inexorable march of history, forever whispered through the ages.